You had the mom who was crazy about her little girl, loved spa weekends, and was always snapping selfies with her crew while sipping drinks. Then you had the alter ego known as George. She was the stripper, the high-end companion, and the lady living rent-free in a cottage right on a castle estate. All her bills were paid, cars included, and she jumped into this world of high-priced dates when she was barely 20 years old. At the start, it was all flash and dazzle, with burlesque shows, modeling gigs, and pockets full of under-the-table cash. But stripping away the glitter revealed a lot of stress, especially after her partner tragically took his own life. Her dad died just a few months later, and friends claim that's when the booze and drugs really took hold. She began dealing with extreme emotional highs and lows, likely fueled by the substances she was taking. A few people overheard her blaming her sugar daddy for everything that was going wrong. She mentioned to others that she was just sick of the whole deal. That said, the arrangement paid serious cash, sometimes up to 10,000 pounds a month, but that money definitely came with strings attached. Georgina had the power to cut the cord anytime she wanted. She was seeing other guys, talking about moving back to London for gigs, and making new plans over the phone. Being tied down to just one client wasn't the life she wanted. She planned to keep the free house and the gifts while doing her own thing. She thought she could play both sides, but no matter what she planned or thought, someone was always listening in. It wasn't her buddies or her folks, but actually someone else who had hidden a bug inside a wall outlet at her place. It wasn't a pretty gadget, and Georgina didn't have any real use for it. But it was a listening device, and the person who planted it had called in to eavesdrop hundreds of times. That means countless hours of her private life were beamed straight to another room where a man was teetering on the edge of obsession, control, and pure evil. There were always guys chasing after Georgina, some just for a fling, and others who were bad news. Peter Lomax was the boyfriend she had a rocky relationship with for years. When Peter died in 2015, his loss sent Georgina into a tailspin, and she started hitting the bottle and drugs way harder. One of her pals mentioned she started lashing out at everyone nearby, looking for a scapegoat to blame. Then came Tom Ballinger, a married guy she bumped into at a funeral reception. They started texting pretty much immediately, and it wasn't long before they fell hard for each other. She told Tom straight up that she was going to dump her rich benefactor, but not until she got the title to the castle cottage. She figured that house was her ticket to a fresh start, but then you had Rich Pete, the main player in the game. He was an older, quiet guy who footed the bill for her rent, her lifestyle, and her salary. Georgina's mom said her daughter thought she had him wrapped around her finger, had dirt on him, and could take him down. Every guy in her life played a different part, and from the outside looking in, it seemed like she was juggling them all just fine. However, those connections were starting to cause some serious stress. Jealousy and bad blood popped up here and there, but cash was the glue holding it all together. By January 2016, she told one guy she was leaving the other. She said this, to hint that a real future with Tom was actually possible. She vented to her friends about how mad she was and made an idle threat to take Pete's fortune, but Rich Pete was right there on the line. To the outside world, it looked like Georgina was living the dream. She had access to a BMW, a Range Rover, luxury spa days, and even helicopter rides. She even managed to get free liposuction. Plus, she was living without paying a dime in a house sitting right in the shadow of a castle. That goes to show this wasn't your average setup, considering the serious money being paid for her to be exclusive. 7,000 pounds one month, 10,000 the next, and he paid for absolutely everything. He was loaded, super careful, and took a lot of pride in his money. Georgina promised to stay faithful to him alone, soaking up the luxury while he just enjoyed her company, which he figured was a fair deal they both had to stick to. But she decided to tear up that contract, bouncing wildly between bursts of sweet affection and sudden, explosive rage. Even her own mom admitted she could be cruel, and she eventually looked him in the eye and swore she was going to hurt him. She actually escalated things by urging him to end his own life, yet the cash deposits kept hitting her account right on schedule. Brand new vehicles kept rolling into the driveway, while she stayed put in the mansion she stubbornly claimed was already her property. It wasn't long before her quiet hints about extortion turned into loud, brazen threats. She bragged to her inner circle that she could destroy his entire world with just one well-placed sentence. She let them know she had the dirt on his finances, specifically where he hid his cash and how he cooked his tax books. She even flashed incriminating photos of him to prove she had the upper hand, fully convinced she owned him and controlled the whole game. Whenever she was out with her crew, she would just laugh and make a mockery of the situation. She talked like the match was already over and she was just waiting to collect her trophy. Witnesses heard her plotting to bleed Rich Pete dry before starting a fresh life in London, treating it like just another item on her to-do list. But there was a massive disconnect between her perception and reality. While she thought she was the puppet master, Pete was silently building a trap. He saved audio files of the private things she said in her living room, playing them back over and over to dissect every single syllable. The control dynamic in their relationship was never stable for long. It swung back and forth like a pendulum, with both of them convinced at different times that they were the one winning the war. Rich Pete, however, absolutely refused to let that scenario play out. She had about 12 of those standard white wall plugs, but one of them was rigged with a hidden SIM card and a tiny microphone. That little gadget let Pete dial in from anywhere on the planet to eavesdrop on her home, and he didn't just do it a couple of times. Throughout a span of 10 weeks, he tuned in to her life exactly 514 times. He caught everything from gossip sessions with her girlfriends and giggling with other guys to her constant trash talking about it. Her blackmail plots were beamed straight to his ears for hours, and sometimes she sounded like she was practicing her script before confronting him. To an outsider, it looked like she was popping champagne for a victory she hadn't actually nailed down yet. She walked around acting like the big payout was already a done deal. Word got out that she planned to bolt the second the deed to the house was in her name, making it obvious she was only staying for the property. She openly admitted she was going to scam him, unaware that every syllable was being recorded, logged, and fed directly into Pete's headset. The proof kept piling up that she was a liar who was cheating on him while actively plotting her escape. Things were teetering on the edge of getting a whole lot darker and way more dangerous. Then, on a cold night in January, something he heard over that wire pushed him to grab a pen and start making a list. This wasn't your typical grocery run or a set of harmless daily reminders. The ink on that page began to spell out plans much more sinister than dinner reservations or mundane household chores. Georgina had a history of strong-arming folks to get her way, usually leaning on compromising photos and videos as her weapon of choice. People trusted her with their darkest secrets, and she weaponized that private intel to squeeze them for whatever she wanted. Her strategy worked like a charm, with plenty of rich guys paying out huge amounts of cash just to keep their names clean. She boasted to her girlfriends that her hustle was actually pretty simple and practical. If one guy wouldn't cough up the money, she'd just shrug and move on to the next target. She was so arrogant about her track record that she bragged about cleaning out one guy's entire life savings, but now she had landed an even bigger whale. She had her hooks in a man who was richer and more generous than anyone she had ever met before. She didn't hesitate for a second to use her pile of evidence against him, raising the question of what would happen now that she was ready to bail. Most people are totally clueless about how much their own smartphones are actually spying on them. Even with the screen black, those devices keep leaking data, pinging towers, and leaving digital breadcrumbs everywhere they go. Detectives followed that digital trail all the way down to a location in South Wales. They found a white luxury SUV tucked behind a wall off a lonely farm road. It was sleek, expensive, and designed to blend in unless you really stared at it. Peter Morgan, the guy everyone calls Rich Pete, owns that land and stayed totally calm, acting polite and eager to help the officers. He even offered to head inside and put the kettle on for some tea. He comes across as the type of guy who keeps everything squared away and never misplaces a wrench. When investigators brought up Georgina, he didn't dodge the subject, saying he knew exactly who they meant before agreeing to let them look around. With a soft electronic beep, the doors of the sport utility vehicle slide open. Officers dug out Georgina's mobile device from under the driver's bucket seat, tucked away in the dark gap where stray French fries and spare coins usually end up. Peter pulls it out, explaining that he'd confiscated the thing to cut off her drug supply, claiming he intended to give it back later. It sounds like a thoughtful gesture, yet the delivery feels incredibly staged. A team logs the specs of the gadget while a separate unit sweeps through the residence a second time. They snap photos of the wall charger, but the item is actually a decoy. Concealed inside the cheap plastic casing is a subscriber identity module card paired with a miniature listening device designed to fly under the radar. It's a wiretap. This find changes the whole game, transforming an innocent household item into a tool for deliberate spying. Peter came into the world with a silver spoon in his mouth, enjoying high status and endless chances from day one. However, even with the safety net of family cash, his existence wasn't exactly a walk in the park. Underneath the shiny exterior of riches, there were hidden stressors and complex issues that remained invisible to most. He grew up in a prominent Welsh agricultural clan on a massive 300-acre spread just outside of Usk. The kid could drive big rigs and dirt bikes before he even hit 10 years old. Plus, he handled machinery better than the majority of grown men. He always had a thing for motors, construction lifts, and armored vehicles. That fascination never really faded away. Eventually, he cluttered his property with firearms and automobiles displayed like prize ribbons. He was a collector who simply enjoyed owning stuff. As a grown man, he multiplied his fortune. After developing residential properties, his net worth sat somewhere around $20 million. For over 2 decades, he played the role of the devoted husband and father to 2 daughters. Inside, however, he was itching to break out of that mold. Around 2011, approaching the Big 5-0, Peter began soliciting female company. What started as a midlife diversion rapidly morphed into a routine addiction. He eventually admitted to physicians that figuring out a smartphone unlocked a world of escort sites, and he just kept going. He crossed paths with Georgina in 2012, and unlike the casual encounters, he kept coming back to her. He enjoyed her company due to her youth and looks, yet he continued booking appointments with other providers regardless. By 2015, Peter's spouse, Helen, uncovered the reality regarding the drained accounts and the women he'd brought into their residence. Following 23 years as a couple, they called it quits. Peter immediately shifted all his attention onto Georgina. He cut a deal to give her up to $10,000 monthly for exclusivity. He even set her up in a cottage right on the Pencode Castle estate. He basically handed her whatever she demanded. Witnesses recall him openly declaring his love for her. Insiders then described her as his closest companion. Yet, he told her plainly that he understood the dynamic. If the cash flow dried up, she would be gone. He continued the monthly payments until the funds could no longer hold her interest. Back at the ranch, the man remained eerily composed. He fielded every inquiry without requesting legal counsel. He claims his only goal is to assist the investigation. Retrieving a set of keys from his trousers, he places them on the surface. The metal clatters against the wood as he gestures toward the outbuilding. He informs the officer that she will require those for a specific storage unit. Appearances can be deceiving, he notes. Amidst the immaculate guest house and the pristine agricultural grounds, a mother was missing. Detectives were inching closer to the grim reality. A squad of law enforcement agents crunched down the stone driveway leading to the barns. Silence hangs in the air, broken only by a soft mist tapping against the tin coverings. Upon checking the initial entrance, they discovered standard landscaping gear. The next bay contained shovels and hand tools. A padlock snaps open with a sharp mechanical sound. A draft of chilled, sterile air rushes out. Rows of equipment line the perimeter, but their eyes catch a different shape. There is a long, plastic-wrapped package on the floor. The bundling is precise and methodical. An officer crouches low, grazing the polyethylene covering with latex-protected fingers. He slices a tiny opening in the material. The layers part just enough to reveal human flesh. It exposes a pair of feet. It confirms Georgina was only 25 years old. The girl who had been waiting by the school gates was her own daughter. But finding her like this does not solve the puzzle. It actually creates more questions. Whoever dumped her there had enough time to tie her up, wrap her body, and lock her away in total silence. Back at the farmhouse, the man remained completely unfazed. He did not bat an eye when the officers told him where they had located her. Instead, he just tilted his head and quietly stated, "I got into a fight with her earlier this morning." When the trial finally started, the defense team used psychology as their main angle. They argued that Peter, also known as Rich Pete, who stood accused of murdering Georgina, was not acting out of malice. The argument presented was that he had Asperger's syndrome. Medical experts testified that someone with that condition might process thoughts in rigid black and white terms and struggle to handle sudden shifts. They also noted that a person with that diagnosis often craves structure, precision, and a strong sense of control. One shrink took the stand and claimed the diagnosis was the missing puzzle piece, shedding light on why the defendant preferred tinkering with gears over bonding with people. It clarified his intense fascination with heavy artillery, construction cranes, and old war stories. And the reason he rigged that Isabel spy bug, dialing in hundreds of times to hoard intel like he was studying for a final exam. The defense argued that when Georgina tried to squeeze him for cash or leverage, he felt completely cornered, believing he had zero options left but to cave in to exactly what she wanted. But the state wasn't buying that sob story for a second, insisting this wasn't some spur-of-the-moment mistake or confusion. They hammered home the proof of planning, flashing a shopping list that read like a killer starter pack with cling film, heavy tape, and wire. He had staged every single piece of that deadly toolkit well before he ever pulled up to the driveway. No matter what the shrink said about his headspace, the prosecutors held firm that he knew exactly what he was doing. At 3:20 in the morning, a reminder popped up on his screen with three simple words: handle, tape, adapter. It sent a chill down the spines of the cops and seasoned true crime junkies alike because there was an actual checklist: gloves to keep his prints off everything, and tape designed to silence screams or bind things tight. Plastic sheeting meant for body disposal, and heavy cord meant to tie someone down or stop them in their tracks. While eavesdropping on Georgina through that bug, he heard her vow to cheat, dump him, and start fresh with some new guy. When the sun came up, the grim strategy was set in stone. Later that morning, he rolled up to the cottage he'd promised her, the same spot where she was planning a future without him, and he let himself in. They talked, voices raised, but Peter wasn't winging it because he had walked in there with a script in his head. That checklist was burning a hole in his pocket while the prepped cord sat ready for action. He'd even mapped out the logistics of moving her body, bringing along a metal bar to help leverage the weight. Most folks feel like their home is their fortress, a safe haven from the world outside. But for Georgina, that January morning, her place was just a bait and trap where escape became impossible once the knot was pulled taut. The trial eventually laid it all bare, revealing that Peter took his sweet time instead of rushing. He didn't hit back, keeping his hands free to fashion loops in the wire, proving beyond a doubt that this was premeditated. He slipped the rope around her throat, cinched it tight to choke her, and then let it go. He tried to tell the panel he never meant to end her life, just to spook her, claiming he would have quit if she'd just given in. But Georgina stood her ground, going about her business as if the whole nightmare wasn't happening. The gravity of it all didn't hit him until that afternoon when he found out her kid had been picked up from school. He did this to the woman he supposedly loved, yet he chatted with the cops without shedding a tear or shaking a bit. He just shrugged and said, "I did it," kicking off a trial that dragged on for 3 weeks while the judges heard it all. They sat through testimony about her threats and that hidden bug he planted to spy on her private chats, the blueprints, the shopping lists, the rope, and how he confessed right off the bat. Still, his lawyers pushed for leniency, claiming his Asperger's clouded his judgment and wrecked his decision-making skills, making it hard for him to read the room or break out of his rigid thinking. But the jury saw a different picture. They saw clear planning and distinct choices, leading the judge to call it cold and calculated, driven by fear and anger rather than passion. He got slapped with a life sentence and has to sit behind bars for at least 25 years before he can even ask for parole. That ruling didn't feel like much of a win for the grieving family. Her mom talked about the crushing loss and the little girl now growing up without a mother, noting that no prison term could fill that void. She predicted exactly how it would play out, and sadly, she was right. Georgina's murder remains a spooky warning of how a need for control can twist a wealthy life into a total horror show. Peter Morgan didn't just snuff out Georgina's light. He wrecked the lives of everyone in their orbit, leaving behind a trail of hurt and questions that'll never be answered. If this case grabbed your attention, smash that like button and subscribe. We drop new crime stories every single night. Catch you later. Stay safe and keep your eyes open. Today, we're diving deep into one of the spookiest mysteries to come out of South Wales, specifically the murder of Georgina Simmons. The school bell rings out while the pitter-patter of little feet fills the air. A 5-year-old looks around the yard, hoping to spot her mom in the crowd, but she never shows up, and calls from the staff go unanswered. Loved ones give it a shot too, but get zero luck. So by sundown, the family has to come pick the poor kid up. Back at her mom's place, the house stays dark, with a cup of tea sitting ice cold on the table and the dogs waiting to be fed. Everything looks clean inside, maybe a little too clean for comfort. To the people who knew her, Georgina Simmons lived a double life.